cold winter morning turned into the beginning of an unexpected and dangerous story when the owner of a small bakery discovered something shocking at his doorstep. Who could have imagined that behind the cozy walls of his shop, a fight for life and justice would unfold? This story will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. Want to know how it all turns out? Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and don't miss our upcoming stories. Michael stepped out of his small, cozy bakery, Dulce Esperanza, to shovel the fresh snow covering the narrow street in the heart of the quiet Vermont town. The air was icy, and his breath formed small clouds as he exhaled. For Michael, this was routine. The bakery, with its warm light spilling out of the windows and the smell of freshly baked bread lingering in the air, was his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the comfort of work and memories of his late mother, who had once owned the bakery. But this morning, something unusual caught his eye. At the entrance to the bakery, a large, worn-out cardboard box sat, the edges damp with frost and snow. Michael frowned. The box seemed out of place, as if it had been left there in haste. His heart sank as a sense of unease crept into him. Slowly, he put down the shovel and approached the box. A part of him hesitated, unsure of what he might find inside. He crouched down, carefully lifted the lid, and froze. Inside were 4 children, shivering from the cold. The youngest, a baby not older than a year, was wrapped in a thin, frayed blanket. His tiny hands trembled as he clutched the edges, his dark brown eyes glistening with tears. Next to him were 2 boys, no older than 3 or 4, huddled together, their faces pale and frightened. The oldest, a girl about 5 years old, had her arms protectively wrapped around the younger ones, her small frame visibly shaking. Her large, wary eyes locked onto Michael's, filled with distrust and fear. "Dios mío," Michael muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. His heart ached at the sight. "What are you doing here?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she tightened her hold on the younger children, her small body shielding them as best as she could. Michael noticed their clothes, thin, worn, and clearly unfit for the freezing weather. On the girl's coat, he spotted a strange symbol embroidered on the chest, a triangle with a single letter inside it, written in an unfamiliar script. He reached out to touch it, more out of a curiosity than anything, but the girl flinched and let out a sharp, panicked cry. Don't touch it!" she shouted, her voice trembling. "They'll come!" Michael pulled his hand back, startled by her sudden outburst. Her words sent a chill down his spine. "Who will come?" he asked softly, but the girl didn't answer. Her gaze darted nervously around the empty street. Realizing the children were freezing, Michael pushed aside his questions for the moment. He carefully extended his hand, his tone as gentle as possible. "It's okay. I won't hurt you. Let's get you inside where it's warm, all right?" The girl hesitated, but the biting cold was too much. After a long pause, she gave a slight nod. Michael quickly lifted the baby first, cradling the tiny, trembling body against his chest, and then helped the other children out of the box. He noticed how light they were, their thin frames a testament to hunger and neglect. Once inside, the bakery's warmth enveloped them, and Michael immediately set to work. He grabbed blankets from the back room, wrapping each child snugly before kneeling beside them with a tray of warm milk and pastries. "Here," he said gently, offering a cup to the girl. "Are you hungry? Have a little something." The girl stared at the cup with suspicion at first, her eyes never leaving Michael's face, but hunger eventually won. She reached out and took it, her small hands trembling. The younger boys followed her lead, eating the pastries with a desperation that broke Michael's heart. As the children ate, Michael sat across from them, a storm of emotions brewing inside him. Who could abandon children in the freezing cold like this? Why were they so terrified? And what was the meaning of that strange symbol on their clothing? His thoughts were interrupted when the girl spoke, her voice barely audible. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes glancing down at the warm cup in her hands. Michael managed a small smile. "You're safe here," he assured her. "No one's going to hurt you." The girl looked at him, studying his face as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Finally, she said, "My name is Lucy." Michael nodded, his smile growing warmer. "It's nice to meet you, Lucy. And what about them?" he asked, gesturing to the younger children. Lucy hesitated, her expression guarded. "They're my brothers," she said simply, offering no further details. Michael didn't press her. He could see she was still wary, and he didn't want to scare her any more than she already was. Instead, he stood and grabbed his phone. "Lucy, I'm going to call someone who can help, okay? She's a friend of mine. Her name is Isabel, and she works with the police. She's kind, and I trust her. She'll know what to do." Lucy's eyes widened with panic. "No, don't call anyone," she exclaimed, her voice rising. "If they find us, they'll take us back." Michael crouched down in front of her, trying to calm her. "Lucy, I promise, no one will hurt you. Isabel is good. She'll help us keep you safe." Lucy stared at him, her fear battling with the faint glimmer of trust that had begun to form. After a long pause, she gave a reluctant nod, though her hands clutched the blanket tightly. Michael stepped into the back room and dialed Isabel's number. The call rang twice before she answered. "Michael, why are you calling so early?" Isabel asked, her voice groggy but tinged with concern. "Isabel, I need you to come to the bakery right away," Michael said, his voice tense. "It's serious. I found 4 children outside this morning. They're terrified, Isabel, and there's something strange about this." "What do you mean?" Isabel asked, her tone shifting immediately. "They're wearing old, thin clothes, and there's a weird symbol on their jackets. It looks like, I don't know, like some kind of marking, and they're scared out of their minds. Please, just get here." "I'll be there as fast as I can," Isabel replied firmly. Michael hung up and returned to the front of the bakery. Lucy was sitting quietly now, her brothers huddled close to her. She looked up at Michael with cautious eyes. "Is your friend coming?" she asked. "Yes," Michael said with a reassuring smile. "She's on her way. Everything's going to be all right." But as he looked at the children, so small, so vulnerable, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. Isabel arrived at the bakery within 20 minutes, the urgency in Michael's voice making it clear that something was seriously wrong. She stepped out of her car, adjusting her scarf against the biting wind, and quickly made her way to the door. Michael opened it before she could knock, his expression tense and worried. "They're inside," he said quietly, leading her to the corner of the bakery where the children sat huddled together under thick blankets. Isabel's sharp eyes immediately took in the scene, their thin, shivering bodies, the fear etched into their young faces, and the strange triangle symbols embroidered onto their coats. She knelt down in front of the oldest girl, who was clutching the baby tightly, her gaze wary and untrusting. "Hi, sweetheart," Isabel said gently, her voice soft and soothing. "My name's Isabel. I'm here to help." The girl didn't respond, but her grip on the baby tightened. Isabel glanced back at Michael, who stood silently nearby, his arms crossed, watching with concern. Isabel turned her attention back to the girl. "What's your name?" she asked softly. The girl hesitated before finally whispering, "Lucy." Isabel smiled warmly. "That's a beautiful name, Lucy. Can you tell me who these little ones are?" Lucy's eyes darted to Michael and then back to Isabel. "My brothers," she said simply. "That's Caleb, Eli, and the baby is Noah." Isabel nodded, her expression calm and reassuring. "You've been very brave taking care of them. But can you tell me how you ended up here? Were you with anyone before this?" Lucy's face fell and she shook her head. They told us to stay quiet. They said if we didn't, bad things would happen." Her voice cracked and she looked down, clutching Noah closer. Isabel's heart sank. She recognized the signs of trauma and fear, the kind that came from experiencing unimaginable things. She didn't push further, knowing she needed to gain Lucy's trust first. Standing up, Isabel motioned for Michael to join her in the back room, away from the children. "Michael, this is serious," she said in a low voice. "Those symbols on their clothes, they're not random. I've seen them before in reports about a child trafficking ring operating across state lines. If these kids escaped from that, they're in more danger than we realize." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "What do we do? I can't let anything happen to them." Isabel nodded firmly. "First, we need to get them to a safe location. I can arrange for them to stay at a secure shelter while we investigate. But Michael, if these kids are tied to that organization, the people responsible will stop at nothing to get them back." As if on cue, the bell above the bakery door jingled, and Michael and Isabel both froze. Michael's heart sank when he saw the man who walked in. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his hair slicked back and his every movement exuded confidence and authority. But there was something cold and calculating about him that sent a shiver down Michael's spine. "Good morning," the man said smoothly, his voice calm but carrying an underlying edge. "I've heard great things about this bakery. Thought I'd stop by and see for myself." Michael forced a polite smile, his mind racing. "Welcome. What can I get for you?" The man's eyes roamed the room, lingering for a moment on the children in the corner before he turned his attention back to Michael. "Apple pie, I think. I hear it's your specialty." Michael nodded and stepped into the kitchen to prepare the order, his hands trembling slightly. He could feel the man's gaze following him, even through the thin wall separating the counter from the kitchen. Isabel stayed at the front, her sharp eyes never leaving the stranger. "Cute kids," the man said casually, nodding toward the corner. "Are they yours?" Isabel stepped forward, her tone firm but polite. "They're waiting for their parents," she said, her voice betraying none of the tension she felt. The man smiled faintly, but his eyes held no warmth. "Ah, I see. Well, I hope they don't keep them waiting too long. It's cold out there." Michael returned with the pie, placing it on the counter. "Anything else for you today?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. The man shook his head, pulling out a crisp bill and placing it on the counter. "No, that'll be all. Thank you." He picked up the pie and turned to leave, but paused at the door. Glancing back at Michael, he said, "You have a nice place here. It'd be a shame if anything disrupted it." And with that, he walked out into the snow, disappearing into a sleek black car parked across the street. As soon as he was gone, Michael locked the door and turned to Isabel. "That was him, wasn't it? The one behind all this?" Isabel nodded grimly. "I'd bet my badge on it. That was James, the man we've been trying to build a case against for months. And now he knows the kids are here." Michael felt a wave of dread wash over him. What do we do now? Isabel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll move them to the shelter tonight. I'll arrange for officers to escort them, and I'll stay here until everything is set up. But Michael, you need to be prepared. James won't back down easily." Later that evening, as the bakery grew quiet and the children dozed off in the warmth, Michael sat with Isabel, his mind racing. "Lucy trusts me," he said quietly. "She's terrified of anyone else. What if she refuses to go?" Isabel sighed. "Then we'll have to convince her. She's been through enough. But Michael, keeping them here isn't safe. You saw how James looked at them. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." Michael nodded, his jaw tightening with determination. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't." As the night wore on, Michael checked the locks on the doors and windows for the third time, his nerves frayed. In the corner of the bakery, Lucy stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mr. Michael?" she whispered. He knelt beside her, his voice soft. "What is it, sweetheart?" Lucy hesitated before whispering, "They'll come back. They always do." Michael felt a pang in his chest but managed a gentle smile. "Not this time, Lucy. I promise. You're safe here." But even as he said the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that their safety was hanging by a thread. The house on the outskirts of town was small but secure, surrounded by a thin layer of fresh snow. Michael, Isabel, and the children arrived late in the evening, the sky already dark and heavy with the promise of another snowfall. Isabel had assured Michael that this safe house, set up by the local police, was the best place to protect the children. 2 officers were stationed outside, their patrol car parked discreetly behind the building, but the tension in Michael's chest didn't ease. The children, exhausted from the day's events, were quiet as Michael helped them inside, carrying the youngest, Noah, in his arms. Lucy clung to his sleeve, her eyes darting nervously toward the windows. Inside, Michael quickly set about creating a sense of normalcy. He found some spare blankets in the cupboards and laid them out on the worn couch and floor, making makeshift beds for the children. He warmed up soup on the stove, the rich aroma filling the air, and served it to the children with slices of bread. As the younger boys ate, their small hands clutching the bowls tightly, Lucy remained quiet, her spoon untouched. Michael knelt beside her, his voice soft. "Lucy, you need to eat. You need your strength." She glanced at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "Will they find us here?" she whispered. Michael hesitated, not wanting to lie to her. "This is a safe place," he said carefully. "There are people outside who will protect you. I'll protect you." Lucy nodded slowly but didn't look convinced. After dinner, the younger boys fell asleep almost immediately, their small bodies curled up under the blankets. Lucy stayed awake, sitting by the window with her knees drawn to her chest. Michael joined her, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "You should rest," he said gently. She shook her head. "I can't. If I sleep, they'll come." Her words sent a chill down Michael's spine. He didn't know what these children had endured, but it was clear that their fear ran deep. "Lucy," he said softly, "I know you're scared, but you're not alone anymore. No one will hurt you as long as I'm here." Lucy looked at him, her small face a mixture of exhaustion and mistrust. After a long pause, she finally said, "I know where they are." Michael frowned, confused. "Who?" he asked. Lucy's voice was barely audible. "The other kids, the ones they took. I remember the place." Michael leaned closer, his heart racing. "Lucy, can you tell me about it?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "It was near a river, a big, cold building. It smelled like wood and oil, and there was always water running nearby. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her eyes were steady. Michael nodded, his mind already racing. "Thank you, Lucy. That's very brave of you to tell me. I'll let Isabel know." The next morning, Isabel returned to the safe house, her expression grim but determined. Michael pulled her aside and relayed what Lucy had told him. Isabel's brow furrowed as she listened. "That matches the description of a warehouse we've been watching near the river," she said. "If she's right, we might finally have enough to act." Michael felt a flicker of hope, but also dread. "What happens next?" he asked. Isabel sighed. "We'll organize a raid, but it'll take time to prepare. In the meantime, you need to stay here and keep the kids safe. If James suspects they're here, he'll make his move." That evening, as darkness fell over the house, the tension inside grew heavier. Michael paced the small living room, glancing at the windows every few minutes. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and the officer's patrol car sat motionless in the distance. Lucy sat quietly at the table, drawing on a scrap of paper with a pencil Michael had found in a drawer. The two younger boys played with an old set of toy blocks, their giggles a rare sound of joy in the otherwise somber atmosphere. But the peace was short-lived. Around midnight, Michael heard the crunch of tires on snow and froze. He quickly turned off the lights, motioning for Lucy to stay quiet. From the corner of the room, he could see the faint outline of a black car pulling up near the house. 3 figures stepped out, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim moonlight. Michael's chest tightened as he recognized the tall, imposing figure of James leading the group. Michael crept to the window, his heart pounding. One of the officers stationed outside approached the car, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. James spoke to him, his gestures calm but deliberate. After a tense exchange, the officer nodded and returned to the patrol car. Michael's stomach dropped. "They're testing us," he whispered to himself. He turned to Thomas, the burly lumberjack Isabel had asked to help keep watch. "Stay with the kids," Michael said. "I'm going to the door." Michael stepped outside, his breath visible in the freezing air. James stood near the car, his polished demeanor unchanged despite the tension in the air. "Good evening, Michael," James said smoothly. "I thought I'd stop by and check on things. It's such a quiet place, isn't it?" Michael clenched his fist, struggling to keep his voice steady. "What do you want?" he asked. James tilted his head, his cold smile never wavering. "Oh, just making sure everything's all right. You see, I heard there might be some uninvited guests here." Michael took a step forward, his voice firm. "There's nothing for you here. You should leave." James chuckled, the sound low and menacing. "Michael, you're a brave man, but bravery only gets you so far." He motioned to his men, who began moving toward the house. Before Michael could react, the front door opened and Thomas stepped out, holding a wooden bat in his hands. "You heard him," Thomas growled. "Get off this property." For a moment, no one moved. The tension was suffocating. Then one of James's men lunged forward, but Thomas swung the bat, forcing him to retreat. The commotion drew the attention of the officers, who quickly exited their car and approached, their hands on their holstered weapons. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked, his tone sharp. James raised his hands in mock surrender. "No problem at all," he said with a smirk. "Just a misunderstanding." He stepped back toward his car, his men following. Before getting in, he looked back at Michael. "I'll be seeing you soon." As the car drove away, Michael felt a wave of relief but knew it was only temporary. Inside the house, Lucy was waiting for him, her eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Michael, is he gone?" she asked. Michael knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "For now," he said, "but we'll be ready if he comes back." That night, no one slept. Michael sat by the window, watching the empty road, while Thomas kept his bat within reach. The children, too afraid to close their eyes, stayed close to Michael, finding comfort in his presence. As dawn broke, Michael knew one thing for certain: they couldn't stay here much longer. The next move had to be theirs. The morning light filtered weakly through the gray clouds as Michael stood by the window of the safe house, his eyes fixed on the empty road outside. His body was tense from the sleepless night, but his resolve had only grown stronger. Inside, the children were still asleep, huddled together under layers of blankets. Thomas sat at the table, sipping a cup of coffee, his bat resting against the chair. "They're not done," Thomas said quietly. "That man, James, he's not going to walk away from this." Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "I know," he replied, "but we can't just sit here and wait for him to come back." Isabel arrived a few hours later, her presence bringing a renewed sense of urgency to the house. She was dressed in her usual police uniform, her expression sharp and determined. Michael pulled her aside as soon as she stepped inside. "He was here last night," Michael said, his voice low but firm. "James came with his men. They tried to test us, but we held them off. They'll be back." Isabel's face darkened. "Then we don't have much time," she said. "We're moving on the warehouse today. Lucy's description matched the location we've been watching. If we're right, this could be our chance to end this." Michael felt a mix of relief and apprehension. "What happens to the kids?" he asked. Isabel sighed. "They'll stay here under guard. I've already requested backup to keep this place secure while we handle the raid. But, Michael, I need you to stay with them. They trust you, and we can't risk them panicking if something goes wrong." Michael wanted to argue, but he knew Isabel was right. "Just promise me you'll bring those other kids back," he said. Isabel placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll do everything we can." As the day progressed, the house grew quieter, the tension mounting with each passing hour. Lucy sat at the kitchen table, staring at the small drawing she had been working on. Michael sat down across from her, his voice soft. "What are you thinking about, Lucy?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with worry. "What if they don't find them? What if James finds us first?" Michael reached across the table, gently taking her small hand in his. "Lucy, you've been so brave. And because of you, Isabel and her team know where to look. They'll find the other kids, I promise." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Isabel and her team prepared for the raid. The warehouse was located on the outskirts of the neighboring town, hidden among rows of abandoned buildings. Isabel had split her team into two groups, one to approach from the front and the other to secure the rear exits. "Remember," Isabel said, addressing her officers, "our priority is the safety of the children. We go in fast and quiet. No unnecessary risks." The team moved under the cover of darkness, their flashlights cutting through the cold night air. As they approached the warehouse, the sound of rushing water grew louder, confirming Lucy's description. Isabel signaled for her team to halt as she surveyed the building. The windows were dark, but faint voices could be heard from inside. Isabel motioned for her team to move in. The front door was locked, but a quick strike from a battering ram sent it crashing open. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of oil and damp wood. Isabel's heart sank as her flashlight illuminated a group of children huddled in the corner, their faces pale and frightened. "It's okay," she called out, keeping her voice calm and steady. "We're here to help." The children didn't move at first, their fear keeping them frozen in place. Isabel crouched down, lowering her flashlight. "You're safe now," she said gently. Slowly, the children began to move toward her, their small hands clutching at her uniform. Meanwhile, the rest of the team fanned out, securing the building and apprehending several of James's men. But James himself was nowhere to be found. Isabel's radio crackled to life as one of her officers reported from the back of the warehouse. "We've got movement. Someone's trying to escape." Isabel sprinted toward the rear exit, her flashlight bouncing against the walls. She arrived just in time to see James climbing into a waiting car. "Stop!" she shouted, drawing her weapon. But the car sped off into the night before she could get a clear shot. Back at the safe house, Michael tried to keep the children calm as the hours dragged on. Lucy sat beside him, her small hand clutching his tightly. "Do you think they're okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael nodded, though his own nerves were frayed. "Isabel knows what she's doing," he said. "She'll bring them back." Finally, just before dawn, Isabel returned, her face lined with exhaustion but triumphant. "We found them," she said, stepping inside. "The children are safe." Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him, his shoulders sagging as the tension melted away. Lucy's face lit up, and for the first time in days, she smiled. "They're safe?" she asked. Isabel nodded, kneeling down to her level. "Yes, Lucy, and it's all thanks to you." The next few days passed in a blur. The rescued children were placed in protective care, and the police intensified their efforts to track down James. Michael stayed at the safe house with Lucy and her brothers, helping them adjust to the newfound sense of safety. One morning, Isabel arrived with good news. "Lucy, we found your family," she said gently. "Your aunt has been looking for you. She wants to take you home." Lucy's smile faltered as she looked at Michael. "Do I have to go?" she asked, her voice trembling. Michael knelt beside her, his heart aching. "Lucy, you deserve to have a family who loves you, but you'll always have a place in my heart, and I promise, if you ever need me, I'll be here." Tears welled in Lucy's eyes as she threw her arms around him. "I'll miss you, Mr. Michael," she whispered. "I'll miss you too, sweetheart," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. In the weeks that followed, James was finally captured and his organization dismantled. Michael returned to his bakery, but life would never be the same. One afternoon, as he was closing up, a letter arrived. It was from Lucy. "Dear Mr. Michael," it read, "I miss you so much. My new family is kind, but no one will ever replace you. Thank you for saving us. I promise I'll come visit one day." Michael folded the letter carefully, a warm smile spreading across his face. He placed it on the counter, glancing out the window at the falling snow. His bakery, once a place of quiet routine, had become a symbol of hope and resilience. And though the children were no longer with him, their laughter and courage would forever echo in his heart. This incredible story has shown us how even ordinary people can accomplish truly great things. Every act of kindness and courage has the power to change lives. If this story moved you, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.